Mafia 2 was released originally for PS3 and Xbox 360 back in 2010, and it was published by 2K Games, and it was developed by 2K Jack. Mafia II Definitive Edition now, 10 years later, almost exactly 10 years later, was developed by Hangar 13, the same developers as Mafia 3. Mafia 2 was originally a very story-driven, very story-heavy game that was focused around Vito Scaletta and his best friend Joe Barbaro, who ended up taking separate paths in life at first, and then they ended up joining back together and getting into the Mafia. At the beginning, Vito ends up in trouble, helping Joe out with some tasks. I won't spoil anything. He ends up in trouble and sentenced to either 10 years in prison or 10 years in the military. Takes the military route. Joe, in the meantime, ends up hanging out with friends of his and ends up being acquainted with Mafia members in the high caliber rank. And when Vito comes back into Lost Heaven, he is reintroduced to Joe Barbaro, who ends up actually helping him out to stay back out of the military, and he also helps him out by getting him a job and eventually into the Mafia. Mafia 2 on PS3, that's what I originally played it on. What I could say about that is that it was a great game with a lot of technical problems, very story heavy. It was a great story, mostly good to great ratio of graphics, facial animations, character models, even car designs. They looked great. The environment, the world actually looked great. Now, the technical problems are frame rate issues, and especially with how large the map was, and with it being on PS3 at the time, it did end up skipping as a game. You would drive a straight line, say for 5 miles, and within those 5 miles, at least every minute and a half, it starts skipping and frame freezing. Otherwise, it was a solid game on PS3. Mafia II Definitive Edition, which was, again, remastered by Hangar 13, I can say almost the exact same stuff about it, with the exception of it being full 4K and HDR support. The story is still the star of this game, but the 4K looks great for the graphics that it already initially had developed inside of the game. The HDR is a perfect match for the color palette of Mafia 2. And I'm not saying that lightly. Mafia 2 on PS3 looked visually beautiful, color-wise. Mafia 2 Definitive Edition, turn the HDR on, and it looks even more colorful than the likes of Avatar. It is just downright beautiful in HDR. It supports a good range of balance of optimizing the HDR, but it's not too in-depth. It's kind of just turn it on or off and then adjustments with the brightness. It's not too in-depth, so some hardcore gamers may have an issue with that. But honestly, the standard HDR support for Mafia II Definitive Edition, unless you have a crappy TV, it doesn't need modified. It is gorgeous. So, the visuals, they were definitely extended and increased and upgraded for the better. It's basically the same layout of the game, but it looks a lot prettier and more colorful. Story is the same with the addition of all the DLC included with it. And again, the story is absolutely amazing. It's definitely the high caliber of this game. The character models, animations, even the facial expressions look amazing. The world itself looks good to great, with the frame freezing and the skipping. It can sometimes, just barely, but sometimes look downright ugly. But otherwise, about 90 to 95% of the time, this is a beautiful looking game. This game still has the same technical problems that I have with Mafia 2. And honestly, there are a couple more on top of that, with it being 10 years later, so I grew more as a gamer. And what I can say is the biggest technical problem I have is the grounded in realism. So, say for example, you're driving a car, you're speeding. A cop will follow you and try to pull you over and fine you. That's fine, that's grounded in realism. But a cop won't turn his sirens on and chase you when you run a red light right in front of him. That just doesn't make any sense to me. At all. I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that I prefer realism in games, movies, and TV shows. I don't know. But to me, there's an imbalance there. Otherwise, I don't have many other complaints other than the bad cop ratio with being a criminal and the technical issues I already stated. Otherwise, everything else is amazing. Story, the gameplay is actually pretty good. Another technical problem I do also have to mention, the controls. I do remember on the PS3 version, the controls were stiff and sticky, and it feels like the Definitive Edition made them worse. All you do is when you're aiming and you just click, you toggle and click the left stick, and the gun just kind of jerks like that, or every now and again it'll just barely do that. It doesn't add up. It's a terrible port for control scheme and control vibration, control sensitivity and whatnot. So yeah, that's my review of Mafia II Definitive Edition. Great visuals for the most part, outstanding story, plus all free DLC. Why not get it? Get the whole Mafia trilogy, $60, $20 each game. Even if you have Mafia 3 already for PS4 or whatnot, why not? It's still a steal, because in August they're remastering the original Mafia, which I have yet to play, because when that released, I was way too young to be allowed to play it. So I'm looking forward to playing that in August and reviewing that. But in the meantime, Mafia II Definitive Edition, I would give an 8 out of 10. Thank you.